Hey guys, and welcome back to History Revision Success. So I've got the last video today on America. This will be very useful for you if you're studying migration or if you're studying power and the people. So for either of those two modules, or if you do a different course, different module that it's still relevant for, keep listening. We're going to look today at what happened in the war, and we're also going to look at the significance and the impact of the war. So you can answer the significance question in the AQA GCSE paper. So just before we start, if you're not already following me on Instagram, please do check it out. There's loads of stuff there that you can use to help you with your studies. So very quickly so by the way, if you haven't watched the video on causes, I advise you watch that first, because this is coming straight after the end of those causes, straight after the Lexington incident that I discussed in that video. So the British were not going to allow the Americans to get away with this. And so they sent soldiers to force the Americans to stay loyal. There was fierce resistance on both sides. By July of 1775, the Americans had appointed George Washington as their leader. And in 1776, Congress met again formally and declared independence from Britain. So they formally declared the Declaration of Independence. Now, it's important to note that this happens before they win the war. So they passed the Declaration of Independence in 1776, but they're still yet to fight the British in the war. Now, within that document, there were lots of very important terms, many of which are still relevant today. One of the most important being all men are created equal. They are endowed with inalienable rights. We hold these truths to be self-evident is a quotation you can use. And it's a formal declaration. It's not the official "we are free." This is then followed by 5 years of fighting against the British. So we have lots and lots of battles. Most of the battles the British win, or the British are more in control of, until we reach the decisive battle that is Yorktown. Now, Yorktown was very, very important. It was a strategic moment and an absolute turning point in the war. The British were led by Lord Cornwallis, and the Americans, well, George Washington was their leader, but essentially the British went into this war completely underestimating the American forces. Britain had won many of the previous battles. They didn't expect very much from the Americans. However, the Americans had been reinforced with 3,000 extra men. They also had the support of the French, who had secured the waters around Yorktown. This meant that the British supplies were blocked off from coming in. The British were stuck on an island, essentially, but it's a peninsula. It was still attached to the land, but it's a bit that sticks out like this. The British commander Cornwallis took his troops onto the peninsula, which was a bit of a mistake because it means they get stuck. They're waiting on this peninsula. There's nowhere to go. A peninsula is like an island that sticks out like this, still attached to land. The Americans can come in and block their retreat, and the French encircle them in the water. They're absolutely stuck. So because of this, they're forced to surrender. Now, with that surrender, the British concede they have lost the war. We've had 5 years of fighting. We've had an awful, damaging defeat at Yorktown, and the British officially give up the war. That's on the 3rd of September, 1783. And with that, there is the signing of the Treaty of Paris. Now, significance. So as you know, for your essay, you're going to need to write an answer on how significant was this event. I'm going to go through this in terms of by place. So we're going to start with Canada. Now, Canada, as you might know, is above North America, so above the continent or above the country that has just won independence. And the colonies of North America, well, the colonies of Canada still wish to be part of the British Empire. Colonies like Quebec, Ontario, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia. And they remained part of the British Empire. They were a key part of the empire until they gained self-government status in 1867. They're still part of the Commonwealth today. So America lost around 100,000 settlers to Canada People who did not want to live under a Republican government, people who were very happy living under the British, decided to migrate, to move up to Canada. Then if we look at Britain, so the war had cost Britain £80 million, a huge amount of money, which increased Britain's debts at the time. Britain had also lost 10,000 soldiers and 20,000 sailors who all died in battle or from disease. However, Britain was rapidly industrializing and it was very, very wealthy. So it could overcome the debts, the losses that they had spent on this war. In addition, they were rapidly industrializing. This meant that by 1785, trade returned to pre-war levels. It was in both America and Britain's interest to ensure trade was not affected. So very, very quickly after the war, they returned to being trading partners. Now, in addition, it had led to the development of the British Navy becoming the world's largest. And America eventually became an ally of Great Britain. As we know today, they're still an ally of Great Britain. So in the long term, losing America was not significant, really, in the long term. The British Empire continued to stretch from Canada to Caribbean to Africa to India. And by 1920, Britain controlled 1/4 of the world. We can also link, however, this event to increasing demands for representation within Britain itself. And if you study Power and the People, you will know the relevance to events like Peterloo and the Great Reform Act, inspired by the events in America and also France, people demanding greater representation for themselves. Going on to America. So America is now a republic. It was free to develop. It was free to expand as it wished. It could act in whatever way it chose. It was the only country to ever gain independence from Britain militarily. However, they lost 25,000 men in the process. Now, this impact was a significant loss in America, and it was felt in labor and industry for years to come. It also led to continuing and strong links with France, and it led to France's own revolution in 1789. The West Indies and South America also felt the impact of the war. Britain colonized parts of the Caribbean and kept Central American territories into the 19th and 20th centuries. Montserrat and the Cayman Islands and the Falkland Islands remained part of the British Empire. Australia also felt the impact. Australia was part of the British Empire, and the British transferred their penal colonies, which is where they sent prisoners when they sentenced them to transportation. They had previously sent them to Georgia, the state in America, and they switched to Australia after the loss of America as part of the empire. Australia continued to be a loyal and dutiful part of the empire, providing goods for Britain, and it's still a part of the Commonwealth today. Now, if you know about the structure of this question, you'll know you need to put this into short and long-term significance in 2 separate paragraphs. So I've got a very quick summary here for you, showing you an essay plan of how to do that. So in the short term, firstly, it was a rejection of royal authority and the only country to leave the empire through force. So we've got the fact the Americans had been angry at George III's behavior. He'd exploited them for taxes and restricted their freedom to trade with the Navigation Acts. And it also did not resolve America's problems. Poor farmers still had no representation. We also know women weren't represented and African Americans were not represented. There was still an issue of slavery, racism, and it takes a very long time to gain kind of representation for everybody in America. It also had a substantial cost to Britain. The loss of America meant Britain had to focus elsewhere. They focused on the rest of the world, Australia for the penal colonies, India became the jewel in the crown, and it inspired a demand in Britain for greater revolution, greater representation, partly why Peterloo happened, and also why Peterloo was treated so harshly through the 6 acts. Long term, it does manage to establish a new form of successful democratic government. Constitution is written. There's the use of habeas corpus. You can link that to Magna Carta if you're studying Power and the People, because Magna Carta is or Magna Carta has been quoted for people who, particularly people who were sent to Guantanamo Bay. There's been many cases where the use of habeas corpus was quoted to try and get them out, to have them freed. They haven't been given the right to fair trial. The colonists also now had their own functioning and representational government. It became an inspirational movement to later movements. So other colonies breaking away from either the British or the Europeans, and to the French to have a revolution against their king, Louis XVI. And that's it. So that's America done. So please do like the video if this has been helpful, and maybe I'll continue doing a couple more videos in this migration series. I'll move on to the next topic, which I think is on Huguenot migration. So if that's useful to you, do let me know in the comments so I know that's something that you will watch and that will be beneficial. Please like and subscribe to the video. It's really helpful for me, and I hope this has been of use to you.